I hope I'm loud and clear. So I think that's the first thing that I do. All of you must be aware in the webinar. Yeah. So if you can just raise your hand, because then that will give me clarity, because I will then start off with the understanding that you can hear me out loud and clear. The request will be, if you are logging on to your mobile phones or your laptops, please use your mics. That will be a better thing. That might cancel out the noise. Super. So I think a lot of responses have come in. I'll try to be very loud. I'll try to be very clear and crisp as well, so that all of you can hear me out very well and we can be very, very audible. So as we discussed every week, this time we are picking up the metal sector. So every week we'll be trying to dissect a few sectors at hand. Last week we discussed infrastructure at large. Before that we had done crude and the information technology sector and the FMCG sector as well. Now metals is a very, very wide aspect in terms of both discussions and in terms of a lot of factors which come into play as far as the overall sector is concerned. Obviously, it's divided into the ferrous and the non-ferrous space, which is as simply put as the steel makers and the non-steel makers. Now, apart from a lot of macro dynamics at play for the sector as a whole, which includes how the global production and supply dynamics are, which basically leads us to the basic economic theory of demand supply. And therefore, how the production numbers will come through, how price realizations will happen, and therefore the kind of leverage on the operating front that these companies will generate. Simultaneously, in lieu of the demand supply dynamics itself, because it's a commoditized nature of business, you cannot really predict how the commodity cycle will play out, both in terms of pricing from an end product perspective, as well as pricing from an input cost perspective to make the end product. Therefore, there are a lot of sum of moving parts which are involved. Ultimately, it does rest on demand supply, but it also does rest in terms of how efficiently any particular company, whether in the ferrous or the non-ferrous space, will be able to do its operating leverage, which means how it is able to justify its volumes. If demand is obviously faltering off, the entire dynamics go off the hook. Therefore, commoditized sectors like metals obviously go through a lot of cyclical patterns and a lot of cyclical pain as well. So in terms of a super cycle where the commodity cycle is booming, you'll see prices moving up, demand skyrocketing, and therefore utilization levels and capacity expansions being announced for a lot of players, whether ferrous or non-ferrous. However, on the flip side, as demand starts tapering off, for any particular reason, if there is the global financial crisis that we can recall, or the current pandemic at this point of time, where the curtailment of demand might actually be very, very onerous from a macro perspective, and therefore from an individual micro company balance sheet perspective as well. It does create a lot of disruptive factors, and therefore the kind of leverage that these companies carry. And because it's a high commoditized nature of business, the expansions that they do in a booming period, if the utilization levels are not up to the optimum level during bane periods or periods of weakness or periods of pain, as we are witnessing right now, the fixed cost absorption does not happen, and therefore the leverage on their balance sheets and the interest outgo, I think that effectively curtails a lot of cash flows at hand. The second element, as I said, obviously is how the entire perspective is to be viewed in terms of end prices as well. And that ultimately depends upon the demand dynamics. Now, China has been a known factor in terms of being a reprocessing economy for the globe as a whole. So apart from internal consumption, they also have a huge amount of production that they supply to the globe. And therefore, in the context of metals, it is a known factor on how Chinese supply and demand is shaping up, how global demand obviously is shaping up in terms of Chinese supply and the global supply as well. And ultimately, how the reflection happens on the London Metal Exchange. So the LME prices become a benchmark in terms of the end user prices are determined obviously based on the first two factors. Now, the fourth element from an Indian context is also the kind of input costs that are required, and even input costs are measurable in terms of dollars. So it is dollar as a peg to a lot of these value transition exchanges, specifically in terms of both the end prices as well as the input prices. So I think it's, as I said, it's a sum of moving parts. So you have to probably assume how the prices might be, assuming the cycle at hand. You probably need to assume how the input costs might play out, assuming the cycle at hand. And third, you also have to keep a close eye in terms of how the exchange rates are moving. Because if the dollar depreciates, as has been the case right now, there can be a significant deterioration in terms of input costs in dollar terms for a lot of these companies, which are carrying these in their books. The fourth obvious impact is in terms of lower demand, what happens in terms of underutilization and what happens in terms of inventory management at the end of individual companies. So I think that is the perspective that the entire sector is based upon. Therefore, I'll go to the presentation directly. We'll discuss a few of the sectors dynamics in terms of individual pockets on how steel is placed, aluminum is placed, copper is placed, and the dynamics related to that. And we'll discuss a few companies also, which are purely from how the sector is positioned. And it is nowhere a recommendation in terms of a buyer or a seller. So again, a clear disclaimer that this is just any stocks that we'll do at the end of the session is just for a theoretical representation in terms of all the discussion skills that we'll have for the sector as a whole. Now, the more important aspects in terms of a few of the sub-segments. So we'll discuss aluminum, as I said, steel more predominantly, gold and copper, and then we'll take a few questions at the end of the session. So before I jump to aluminum, I would actually like to start off with steel. It's very interesting, and why I'm starting off with steel is basically because it has a lot of considerations in terms of the overall dynamics in terms of end user applicability that steel has. Now, if you go to the core dynamics in terms of how the numbers have been for steel as a whole, you can probably look at how the entire numbers are actually pegged, as I said in my opening remarks, to what China produces and what China sells, and what is the LME realization, both in terms of the end product when it comes to steel scrap and other modes of steel as well. Now, just before we get into how the Chinese production has been, the global production for steel in the year gone by has been 1870 million tons. And the global demand for the same year was 1654 million tons. Now, a surprising factor which has come out of all these elements is the number that China produces. In CY19, as the production of 1870 billion tons, as I said, China had almost half of the production of the global steel production. So 996 million tons is what China produced. Now guess who was at the number 2 slot? The number 2 slot was taken over by India in terms of production. So the capacity expansions that a lot of Indian companies are doing, whether it's JSW Steel, the acquisitions under Tata Steel or Bhushan Steel that they've done, Usha Martin that they've done, expansion of GSPL, or even SAIL. So we actually stood in CY19 at 111 million tons. Japan came third at 99 million tons, and USA was fourth at 88 million tons. Now, for a large part, in terms of expectations, and when I went through a lot of transcripts for a lot of these companies at play, and when I looked at the global commentary as well, when I looked at a lot of global steel makers and iron ore manufacturers as well, the interesting points because of the pandemic, what we mentioned in the first paragraph, is on two aspects. One, because of severe demand contraction and economic activities which have been impacted severely, there obviously has been a huge demand loss from the end user industry. Again, when you're talking about global value chains, when you're talking about global supply chains as well, because of the disruption, because of the pandemic, industries might have lost around 2 to 3 months of actual output, which means that the entire scenario that I discussed in terms of volume-led price growth, I think that takes a huge backseat on an annualized basis. So some of that demand which is lost might never come back. And therefore, it can actually be a earnings hit, which can be quite significant. But the street is probably trying to factor that in terms of very, very soft Q1 numbers or Q2 numbers in the global context. Because a lot of lockdowns were very, very effective during this time period. Now, a large expectations, as I said, is that there might be a huge disruption this year around, maybe a higher single digit or a double digit degrowth in terms of steel demand. So the developed economies are expected to see greater contraction in terms of a 17% drop, while the developing economies are expected to see a 11.6% drop in this year itself. Now, glaringly, a lot of managements have actually put forth that from the third or the fourth quarter, you will see significant rebound in terms of demand and construction, industrial activities picking up pace quite significantly. And that might actually lead to a huge rebound. So the kind of capacity additions that will happen for the industry as a whole globally will be on a very, very low scale. And demand is then expected to inch up to around 1725 million tons in the next financial year. Therefore, the kind of Chinese impact that has on global steel production, global steel demand obviously also depends in terms of both Chinese and the global consumption, as well as the LME prices are all at play in terms of demand supply dynamics. Now, apparently, if you look at the per capita consumption of steel as well, and when I was going through interesting data points on that front, you are probably expected to see that 224 kgs is the world dynamic in terms of per capita consumption of steel. China apparently is double the world average, and India is 1/3 of the world average at around 70 kgs. Apparently, as I said, apart from India being the second largest producer, the expectations from an Indian perspective, from a lot of transcripts that we went through, is that there might be an actual contraction of 18% in the Indian context, and then a strong rebound of 15%, as I said. European Union might have a contraction of 16% for the current year and a strong rebound of 10%. Apparently, apart from being the second largest producer in the world of steel, India in the last financial year was also the largest producer of sponge iron. And our numbers actually stood at 37.5 million tons. And we were the second or the third largest in terms of pig iron production at 5.5 lakh million tons. Now the expectations on steel and the expectations in terms of end user applicability is also extremely critical. At this juncture, Indian steel prices are at a 10 and 6% discount to the Chinese and the FTA nations. And with economic activity picking up, there might be chances that there might be some hikes that might come through in steel prices. Now, the entire Atmanirbhar campaign that has been launched, the expectations of second half, specifically in terms of infrastructure development, ports, and which we discussed very, very largely in our last webinar in terms of infrastructure as a sector. Port development, other infrastructure development. Therefore, the usage of steel and the usage of domestically produced steel might go up quite significantly. Now, one must also understand the two applicabilities in terms of steel from an end user perspective. So, you must have heard the terms long products of steel and flat products of steel. So, long products is nothing but steel which is used in the construction sector. So, it's high tensile steel which is required in the construction, which can have larger durability and larger applicability to withstand a lot of pressure. And therefore, the term long, because they are actually long sheets that are actually required in terms of the spread for a construction activity. They're actually made out of billets and looms. And a lot of ancillary players, locally and globally, are also in the process of making billets and pellets as well, which are made out of sponge and iron ore, which are applicable ultimately in terms of the end user applicability of making long products. On the other hand, flat products are nothing but products which are used for automobiles, in our domestic appliances, and therefore they can be curtailed to a smaller size, and they're actually made up of smaller sheets and plates. The other aspect in terms of steel, and as I said, apart from the end prices, is also the input costs, which become very, very critical. And therefore, in the steel making process, apart from power and energy which is required, and there are a lot of players have made a conscious effort to actually have a lot of captive power at play, which reduces significantly the input cost as far as energy is concerned. And because of the captive power also, the fuel efficiency in terms of production, because of captive use, as well as lower carbon emissions that are probably done, ensure that the in-house power optimizes cost at the steel producer's end, ensuring in tough times there is some sanity and some recoupment that is done in terms of the reported EBITDA and the repeated EBITDA per ton. Therefore, the more critical elements of input cost, specifically from a steel production cycle perspective, is iron ore and coking coal. Now, again, there are purities and impurities when it is related to both iron ore and coking coal. So, when you are making good quality or high grade steel, it is recommended that iron ore content is more than 63 or 65 Fe. So, the ferrous or the iron ore content of more than that prescribed limit ensures that top quality steel or high grade steel can be produced. Therefore, the Fe content becomes extremely important from an iron ore perspective. Now, to make 1 ton of steel, apparently 1.5 tons of iron ore are required. To make 1 ton of steel, almost 0.5, 0.7 tons of coking coal is required. Therefore, when you're looking at a sector as a whole, the end prices, which I said ultimately which get determined and to a certain extent are measurable from the LME, the input costs become extremely critical, and the producers of these become extremely critical as well in terms of how the demand supply dynamics are, what are the prices, and what are the price trends of all these commodities. Because ultimately, if input costs start moving higher, if the rupee depreciates against the dollar, we are expected to see higher input costs from a producer's perspective. So apart from the captive consumption that we've got, and there have been a lot of developments that are happening at this point of time. So the latest has been the commercial mining that has been allowed or is expected to go through in terms of the tender process. So in the next few years, a lot of companies can actually bid for a lot of mines, whether it's coking coal, limestone, or iron ore. And therefore, the volatility in terms of these input costs largely will get mitigated because a lot of companies will try to internally bid for to have a complete backward integration, right from input cost procurement and sourcing to the output that they're actually making and the deliveries that they're doing in terms of the supply chain logistic chain. Now, the government understands that, and they also understand that it is a high need in terms of filling up their coffers. And this is the right way to go about it. The companies are happy because of this entire value chain that comes into their fold. And third, with a lot of infrastructure development, as we discussed in the last webinar as well, a lot of supply chain related issues will also get solved. So, for example, the dedicated freight corridor from Delhi to Bombay, the cold chain logistics which will come through, and the linkage to a lot of ports. I think all that is going to be significantly critical when it comes to all these aspects. Therefore, we also need to keep a close eye, as I said, in terms of the input costs. So at this point of time, as I said, for a ton of steel, 1.5 tons of iron ore and 0.6 tons of coking coal. Coking coal at this point of time, and one really needs to have a lot of perspective on this front. So when I was looking through a lot of sites, and when the best site that probably comes through is the Australian side, because that is where we import from. The coking coal is hovering somewhere around $140 to $150 a ton. Iron ore is hovering around $100 to $110 a ton. Now there have been some disruptions in iron ore as well. Vale, the Brazilian producers, that is Itabara complex, which is almost 10% of the output, there have been a lot of reported cases of COVID among the workers itself. The production facilities there have actually come to a standstill. What has happened because of that is that there have been narrowing spreads as far as the Indian context is concerned. Now, what is spread? Spread is nothing but the sell price less the cost of production. Now, the spreads, they are narrowing for two reasons. One, as I said, export prices as a benchmark and as a measurable to the LME are obviously on the lower side. As I said, both steel scrap as well as steel usage at the end. Steel scrap around $262 a ton, steel usage at the end $418 a ton. As I checked last night, around midnight last night. So export prices are at a discount to the import prices or the domestic prices at this point of time. Domestic prices, as I said, are at a discount of 10 to 6% to China and the FTA nations. At this point of time, there has been a higher export volume because of the domestic shutdown. So in the normal context of a 20 to 25, 50 to 20% export volume growth, it's almost 65 to 70%. And because of the product mix change, you've seen narrowing spreads happen. However, numbers have been quite encouraging. So if you look at the sale numbers for the month in April and May, had been relatively better. JSW Steel's number in May were 12.5 lakh tons, out of which flat products, as I said, which are used for automobiles and appliances domestically, 9.05 lakh tons, and long products almost 2 lakh tons. Iron ore prices also need to be accounted for, and NMDC is the best source of probably doing that. So a lot of disputes again on that front. But again, I think the production numbers that came through in terms of that Vaidilala mine and the lump and fine prices have been steadily moving northwards. Lump prices around 2,325 odd rupees a ton. Fine prices around 2,050 rupees a ton at this point of time, and there has been a marginal increase. Though again, these prices are at a discount when you probably look at the FOB prices compared to where international prices are. But any increase on this front, any increase in terms of the input costs, both in terms of coking coal and iron ore, though they are expected to remain reasonably steady at the current juncture because of the fears related to demand and the expectations of more supply domestically coming up, one needs to keep a close eye on this. And if they increase along with the rupee depreciation against the dollar, steel prices ultimately at the end go up as well. On the other hand, you also need to keep a watch on the hot rolled cold coil prices, the cold rolled coil prices ex FOB China. And at this point of time, they are also hovering specifically the HRC prices at $440 a ton. Now, a lot of shipments, as I was reading, and there have been some releasements of shipments from the Chinese ports, and these shipments have probably not got accepted at a lot of global destinations, both because of demand contraction and because of some fears related to how the end products will be and the supplier liquidity issues as well at this point of time. Therefore, a lot of claims have also been raised at the Chinese insurance authorities. I think this is the context in terms of how steel probably moves around. And that's what, because it's one of the most important elements of the metal space, I thought be fit to take it upfront. Now, aluminum, and the other element in terms of aluminum, apart from steel, is it's the commodity which is consumed in a significant manner as well. If you look at this chart, and we've taken this from Hindalco's presentation as well, you look at how the production numbers were. And the blue on your bars is obviously World X China, and the red bar within the bar itself is the Chinese numbers itself. Now you look at how the production numbers had been for CY19. 63 million tons, out of which 35 million tons China. Consumption is very well balanced for the aluminum market as a whole. But when you're talking about consumption, at 64 million tons, it was almost uniform that how much China was producing was consuming itself. And so was the case globally. However, with the pandemic in place, and when you're probably talking about the inventory levels as well, because that is very, very critical. As I said in my opening remarks, the kind of inventories miners are carrying, the kind of inventories the economies are carrying at their end, and the kind of inventories individual companies are carrying because of the first two factors at play becomes extremely important. Now, any sub-segment within this metal space itself, any high levels of inventory, which means that the supply is there and the demand is obviously not there. It's simple economics, right? And therefore, the prices of the end metal will remain depressed. From a global demand supply perspective, as I said, for aluminium, very, very balanced at this point of time. If you look at its overseas subsidiary, Novelis, what is aluminium and the end user applicability? All the soft beverages cans in the developed world that we see, whether it's for alcoholic purposes or non-alcoholic purposes to a large extent, are made up of aluminium. It is also used in automobiles, where the end user applicability in terms of tensile strength and durability and the end results that are being thrown out of that. And again, the usage in terms of the metal being very, very light and relatively non-corrosive to steel has started being deployed. And there has been a significant value addition in terms of aluminum, in terms of the end user applicability. Now, to produce aluminum as well, the requirements are bauxite, which is required, and therefore you probably also need, apart from iron ore, how bauxite prices are moving around, and also alumina prices. So you would have heard NALCO's management, if you would have seen CNBC TV 18 day before yesterday or yesterday itself, expecting to move, expect demand supply to remain tight. Expectations in terms of how major producers are looking at things. So Alcoa, one of the biggest producers, is something that needs to be checked out. On the steel context, how Rusal's commentary is, one of the largest producers, needs to be watched out. Input cost movement, as I said, needs to be watched out as well, quite significantly. And at the same time, how alumina prices are moving around. So expectations of a lot of companies actually having their smelting operations, both in terms of bauxite as well as alumina, specifically in the context of alumina for the smelting operations, are extremely critical of the backward integration chain that I was talking about. Then when you talk about the cost of production, and if you probably look at Hindalco being one of the most integrated players, the integration basically comes in terms of the mines that they have, And a lot of their mines are actually coming to use, and a few of the mines will come to use as well. So the internal consumption of alumina largely mitigates the input cost variability and therefore has a far more sustaining effect in terms of the reported cost of production numbers, and therefore the numbers in terms of the ultimate output that comes through and the EBITDA that they report per ton. Now, why is EBITDA per ton very, very critical? Because that is a measurable in terms of how the metal sector's performance is counted. How your NIMs and spreads are accountable for a banking industry. EBITDA per ton is extremely critical for any commoditized industry as well. So how much is your earnings before interest and tax on every ton that you have produced? And what is the optimal use of your production numbers is extremely critical in terms of assumptions of the numbers that they can carry, because it's a commoditized nature of business and because it's a business where the leverage factor in terms of the debt and the working capital dependence are pretty large. So aluminum, quite well balanced at this point of time. When I was checking out the LME prices as well, and what Hindalco has clearly given is that the prices are actually showing a huge downturn. Now, why is that? This is because of the market sentiment. A large element before the pandemic for the US-China trade sanctions. And these sanctions will hurt demand for metals. And because the demand itself was a little bit off hook. As I said, Rusal, Alcoa, you need to probably monitor how these companies are shaping up and how their balance sheets are shaping up and what commentaries are. Also, mine producers like Vale, for example, have a huge impact in terms of determining of the input costs and the pricing of these input costs in general. Therefore, if you look at CY18, aluminum prices were at $2,110 per ton for a large element of the calendar. They came down quite significantly to 1790. It was almost a 15% fall on a Y-on-Y basis. Till the Jan to March period, it was $1,690 a ton. And as I was checking it yesterday, it was $1,639 a ton. So the expectation is that because of the pandemic, following the US-China trade uncertainties and the disruptions that have got created, the prices will remain or continue to remain on the lower side. In spite of that, I would say that Hindalco had a commendable performance on Aleris in terms of reported EBITDA in the quarter for the financial year gone by. The quarter performance was outstanding at an EBITDA per ton of $473, as well as the reported EBITDA of $373 million. Great margin performance because of backward integration for the Indian operations at 20%. Value-added products showed improvement. And copper, specifically in terms of the copper CC rods, which become a very important and integral component to monitor because of the value-added products that copper has to offer. From the end user applicative perspective, even that showed a significant jump. So aluminum, again, expected to be range bound. Copper. Again, copper, if you probably look at the numbers itself, it's quite well balanced. So look at the CY19 numbers. And you will see that the refined copper production has actually plunged. The degrowth has actually come from China, quite significantly. But again, I think it is expected to hold up because world ex-China has largely remained flat. Now, copper and the end user applicabilities of copper is more of an industrial nature. So like silver, which is an industrial tool, which is used for a lot of applications from an industrial perspective and industrial user applicability. Copper similarly has a lot of end user applicabilities. Now, all of us also know that lithium ion batteries, which is going to be the in thing or the most prominent thing going forward when it comes to electrical mobility, I think that is going to see a significant jump through for a lot of these specialized metals at large. Therefore, one has to keep a close eye in terms of production, supply, inventory numbers for metals like nickel, tin, copper, zinc. And the prices have been relatively resilient. But again, I think as the normal trend has been because of the pandemic, have been hovering on the lower side of their median averages. So I was checking the prices, copper around 6,300 odd dollars a ton. Zinc was around $2,145 a ton as on close in midnight LME yesterday. Nickel was around $13,070 a ton. Tin was $17,080 a ton. And lead was almost $1,850 a ton. Now the prices also have a significant say for end users. So for example, as I said, as an example for lead, battery makers use a lot of lead as well. So lead prices $1,850 a ton. How these prices move ultimately determine their input costs. So they do carry levels of inventory at their individual ends as well. But ultimately, how much of that inventory balance are they supposed to keep at what prices, and how these prices are expected to move along with the rupee depreciation, as I said, respect to the dollar becomes extremely critical. The second aspect also is very, very clearly in terms of the scrap as an alternative. So steel scrap, as I said, the LME $262 a ton. Lead scrap has seen a lot of shortage, and a lot of unorganized players unfortunately will feel the heat when it comes to battery makers. Why? Because of both unavailability of second-hand lead scrap or the used batteries which are coming through, which a lot of access has been to organized players. And a few of these organized players also have back-end smelting operations with them, which reduces their input cost quite significantly. Similarly for copper, if you probably look at how the rally has been, it's 3% up, more or less flattish. But if you probably look, as I said, the average trend, it is still far way below the average mean median on the prices which had been seen in 2017. But still a relatively better off metal, and demand recovery is expected, and there are risks of supply disruption. So as I said, for the sector, apart from how the demand is, the supply dynamics that a lot of these producers do, whether it's Vale or other producers, you probably need to keep a close eye in terms of how their mines are operating. And the biggest players will give you an idea in terms of the entire dynamics that are playing out for these end user input costs, which ultimately have a bearing in terms of the individual companies as well. Now, copper price is expected, as I said, because there are a lot of supply disruptions, a lot of mines probably might have a lower production number this year, which means that the production numbers might come down, supply might be at risk, and therefore the pricing might start inching higher. It's already seen a V-shaped recovery if you see in the box that we have drawn. And it's actually to pre-COVID levels at this point of time. Any further disruptions has to be seen in the context of all these factors at play. Why I'm mentioning this specifically? Because copper price also acts as an indicating indicator and a leading indicator for global growth because of the various applicabilities that copper has for a various lot of industries at play, which are dependent and largely depend on now gold all-time high. Look at how the journey has been. So even this year, hovering around 35, 38,000 and almost 50,000. The large element of gold is expected to be a perfect hedge, both against inflation and it's pegged to the dollar. So what ultimately happens in terms of volatility is that when risk on assets like equities actually turn very, very volatile, these, apart from being a hedge against inflation, also become a hedge against price fluctuations on the asset inflation side when it comes to risk on assets. So it becomes like a safe haven asset. Ultimately, in this run, both gold and equities are running because of the liquidity that is coming. So the liquidity is pumping up equities, and the demand and the saturation in terms of gold and to probably own some element of gold has also driven prices higher. And this is a surprising factor which has been seen. So again, experts suggest that this should also form part of your portfolio as part of asset diversification. So one must also keep a close eye on how gold prices are and where gold is at certain points of time. There are obviously exchange traded funds, there are gold bees, which has now made it very, very easier in terms of owning gold in a digital fashion. Also, the recent gold sovereign bonds that has been introduced in terms of both pricing as well as expectations in terms of how the entire element will be played out. We move to a few stocks, and again, just a perspective in terms of how these stocks are placed in context of what we discussed at this point of time. So I've taken a few individual stocks, and prominently, I think these stocks do take into account. Now, Tata Steel, it has reported in Q1 the provisional numbers, sales volume of 5.28 compared to 6.84. Obviously, it was expected, and therefore, the expectation in terms of lower production numbers because of lockdown, because of demand contraction, and the expectations in terms of how steel prices are expected to move going forward has a great element at play. Now, steel demand in the EU is expected to reduce by around 16%, and that is what they're given in their transcript. What their managerial commentary also suggested is that the steel spreads that they're seeing for the EU region as a whole is because of a lot of imports which will also come through from both China and the Southeast Asian regions. Apart from steel, we also need to have a close observation for ferrochrome prices. And Tata Steel is in the process, because of the leverage that is carrying on the balance sheet, to offload a few of its assets. Apart from the European assets, you're also looking at the ferrochrome assets actually being offloaded in the next few quarters as demand is expected to come through. Indian steel demand is expected to improve gradually because of the expectations of the government spending and the infrastructure spend that we will do. And Asian steel prices are expected to find support from resilient steel demand in China. If you look at the pie chart, you see and observe how the end user aspect has been in terms of sales. So it has been a comprehensive thing on both flat and long. They've also done acquisitions in terms of Bhushan Steel, which is a specialist in terms of specialized products from an end user perspective and end user accessibility. And therefore, the kind of steel spreads that BSL will enjoy or Bhushan Steel, Tata Steel will enjoy will be quite significant. They're ramping it up. They're doing cost optimizations. Therefore, the expectations of steel spread, volumes improving and leverage improving is expected to shoot up as well. Similarly, from the acquisitions of Usha Martin, and the expectation here largely is again the numbers which will get added up. The second element in terms of capex that these companies will entail will also take a backseat, and they will do a little bit of a constrained approach when it comes to capex because of all these factors at play, and because they don't want to have a larger element of fixed cost under absorption on their balance sheets, which ultimately will reflect in lower cash flows. This is how it is appearing in terms of our canceling methodology. We've obviously seen that what the earnings growth rate has been poor, is expected to remain soft, which is reflected through the EPS rating and the EPS strength. If you look at the moving averages, it has rebounded off the March lows, but it still has to take off significant averages at play. So the 200 DMA, the 100 and the 200 is still to be taken out. The 21 and the 50 is where it is comfortably trading first at. So there is high probability of the stocks moving in this tight range, and therefore tactically there might be trading opportunities, but the structural opportunities will come through in terms of improvement from a commentary perspective, how the EPS rating improves, and the price strength also as EPS ratings improve, which will get indicated on the breach of key averages, specifically the 100 and specifically the 200-day average. So at this point of time, if I stack it up, yes, there has been upheaval in terms of how the metals or the commodity sector has been looked in terms of buyer demand, but other factors in terms of EPS rating, price rating, as per our methodology, still remains extremely soft and poor. Hindalco, as I discussed, the Utkal alumina facility, the expansion is on track, and this becomes very, very critical, very, very important in terms of input costs, because alumina and the pricing thereof ultimately becomes a guiding point in terms of how aluminum prices will ultimately play out at the end. Now the Aleris acquisition has been done completely, and therefore what you see will be numbers which will come through on a consolidated basis henceforth. It had a very, very strong cash position. So as I said, the kind of numbers that got displayed specifically on the US operations has been quite significant. So EBITDA at around 393 million, EBITDA per ton got reported at $472 million per ton. And the margins in the domestic context at 20% with a lot of value-added products at play. And value-added products are offshoots of the normal products that you've got, which become extremely critical from an end realization perspective. It has a strong cash position as well. Novelis $2.4 billion, India at 9,900 crores, and the net debt to EBITDA for a high commodity company or high level on a highly commoditized company, which are across market segments, aluminum, copper, and as I said, the copper CC rods, where the production numbers have also been outstanding for the company as a whole, stood at 2.61, which is very, very commendable. Utkal, as I said, recorded the highest quarterly production of aluminum at 441 kilotons. And therefore, the cost of production, or the cost of production as we call it, has been extremely competitive. So the cost of refining and production becomes extremely critical for these commoditized players. The second element, as I said, in terms of input costs, is also how billet and pellet prices are expected to move. And there are a lot of local producers as well. Godavari Power, for example, is one of the largest producers internally on a domestic front of pellets and billets. Now, they are used in terms of the iron ore content that they've got. They've got accessibility to iron ore, and how much do they produce ultimately gets reflected in terms of the end prices as well. So here again, I think input production costs and supply become extremely critical, and they are hovering around 6,800, 7,000 odd rupees. The management feels that they might move higher to around 7,500 for the better part of this financial year. Again, if these prices move up and as they become part of the production of both sponge iron, pig iron as well, and to a certain extent in terms of steel production as well, along with expectations that there might be increases on the iron ore front, though I think it's expected to remain quite large, stable, and coking coal prices. There is some element, as I said, of the discount of prices and some price hikes that can be expected to take place, but that will happen in a gradual aspect as demand starts slowly and steadily coming back at the end of the second quarter and the beginning of the third and the fourth quarter. Clearly, the first quarter washout, second quarter in the Indian context because of monsoon slow execution and therefore lower prices expected. But Hindalco, as we come back to it, both on an EBITDA and a PAT front, exceptional performance. That has got reflected, as I said, in terms of the chart movement. The earnings relatively stable. Top line expected to be a miss for a lot of commodity companies at large, but the recovery has been pretty stark. And that has been the premise in terms of how numbers have got reported and comparatively better placed off, both in terms of both reported numbers as well as the management commentary itself. Therefore, it is very, very close in terms of breaching its 200-day moving. It could not breach that if you look at this bar with extremely high volumes. It just closed near the 200 DMI. And yesterday trade, because it was very, very volatile. And since the volatility continues, though the Dow and DAX have closed and in positive terrain in yesterday's trade, on the expectations on the Gilead trials having some positive success so far, and the unemployment claims going on, though the number of cases are moving higher, and the expectations of a liquidity package plan getting announced. As July 31st, the paychecks which were given off to a lot of unemployed people are running off, and the request has been made to the Senate by the Trump administration to have one more round in terms of liquidity support for the economy as a whole. That is being expected to come through, which is again what the markets are expecting, along with external support that is expected to come through from a lot of central bankers who meet by the end of this week, whether it's ECB or whether it comes to the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Japan as well. So Hindalco, very, very nicely placed, still off the pivot, still off high as you see here of 25-26%, but still a breach of 200 DMA can have a significant acceleration in terms of if the price gets held up about 200. JSW Steel, like Tata Steel, the expansion that is expected for Dolvi unit specifically. And the capex plans that they had. So they have a lot of capex plans in not just of expanding the Dolvi unit by 5 million metric tons, but also they had backward integration plans so that the input cost becomes significantly lower, and also some captive power that was expected to come through. If you probably look at how the dynamics are placed for them, they've actually reduced, as I said, because of the pandemic, the capex guidance to 9,000 crores. And again, a lot of these companies are bidding for a lot of mines. So a lot of mines are expected to get in Odisha and Karnataka. So how these developments take place will also have a large impact in terms of input cost, volatility actually getting stabilized at the end. They've actually won 4 iron ore mines in Odisha. The capacity is 29 metric tons. If you look at their balance sheet, last year, around 5 to 6 million tons had got produced from these mines. So there is still optimum production that is expected to come through, but that ultimately depends in terms of the ultimate steel production, which is expected to remain steady at 15 metric tons. Now that is backed by strong growth in exports. As I said, for steel makers in general, exports have moved up to the extent of 60-65% compared to 15-20% in the normal course because of both lockdowns and contraction pressures seen and the monsoons where lower execution will be seen, and therefore export markets is something that a lot of these players have alluded to. However, there are narrowing spread concerns because export prices are at a discount to domestic prices, and that is a point I've clearly mentioned, which can have an impact in terms of operating EBITDA and reported EBITDA per ton that these players will report. Debt levels are relatively higher. So if you probably look at the net debt to EBITDA, the target is to get to around 3.75 over the next year and a half. It remains a little bit more elevated at 4.5 times at this point of time. Tata Steel is even larger. And therefore, keeping an eye on production numbers, input costs, ultimate leverage on balance sheets become very, very critical when it comes to the ultimate balance sheet dynamic perspective. The ultimate net debt to EBITDA has gone up a tad bit at 1.48. And their ultimate target is not to exceed 1.75 because the impending acquisition of BPCL would get delayed. BPSL, sorry. If that gets delayed, so Bhushan Power and Steel, BPSL is nothing but Bhushan Power and Steel. So that gets delayed, you might have some additional debt burden which goes up, but ultimately management feels and expects that 1.75 times will not get exceeded on its balance sheet. Now, similar to other steel players as well, poor profile here, the EPS rating has been poor. The drop has been quite significant, like for other players. The rebound has been quite sharp. But like Tata Steel and other steel players, it's still of high in terms of not able to take out its 100 and 200 moving averages. So ultimately, the earnings strength, which has been poor over the last few quarters, expected to remain poor in Q1 for a lot of these players. And price strength, which remains poor, means that it might have a constrained trade as per our cancelling methodology. One more stock, and this is a little bit of a diverse stock. Why I would call it? Because it has a power element in it. It has got pellets, which it produces, and it also has the Oman subsidiary, which is the overseas subsidiary in terms of Middle East infrastructure development this way. So a little bit unique. So taken a few steel players, have taken a integrated player in terms of a non-ferrous player in terms of Hindalco, which has aluminum and copper, and JSPL, which has power and pellets apart from steel. Now you look at the manifold growth that it has done. So FY14, FY20, look at power, 3,400 megawatts. Look at the pellet production, almost double at 9 million metric tons per annum. Yes, debt levels are high, but the steel numbers have also gone higher. And its Oman subsidiary, which has started operation, there is every possibility that they will either list that, though conditions are not in their favor, or deleverage some of their balance sheets, which are extremely critical in terms of debt keeping. Now, their own expectations are that the consolidated debt can be reduced by almost 6,000 crores in FY21. Now, exports has a huge recording in terms of 450 kilotons in the quarter with a diversified market mix. They've got Ambul, which is a back-end support in terms of both mines. And the power, again, the numbers that are expected to come through both in terms of captive production which gets used and the sale that they do in terms of merchant pricing is expected to remain stable as well at this point of time. Now they also expect, as I said, apart from the consumption internally of 420 megawatts in terms of PPA and the supply thereof, which will also mitigate in terms of a lot of the unutilized, underutilized power assets and the risk thereof in terms of balance sheet strength. And because the coal demand has remained soft, what the company has actually done is they have put coal at a zero premium cost, which means that the input cost will come down. So as cash flows improve, as deleveraging happens on the balance sheet, as the expectations of PPAs that can get a little bit delayed because of the pandemic get signed off, and if debt gets deleveraged as they've done in the past 2 years, there can be significant value accretion that can come through. And it has already got reflected. If you look at how the price movement has been, it has taken out key moving averages at the beginning of last month. Earnings has been strong. Earnings hit on the top line expected to remain weak. So this is great. Earning strength will still remain a little soft. So EPS rating will still have some say. It is still 16% off high. But still, this is relatively better paced off because of all the factors that I said that are largely at play for this stock as a whole. It's time for queries. Just take a minute or two for any stack up of queries that you have got. So we'll start. There have been a few questions on Vedanta. Now, what happens in Vedanta basically is the entire process were expected to happen through a reverse book building process. Now, what is a reverse book building process? Is that when the minority shareholders are asked at what price they would or what price they deem fit that it should get delisted. Now, they have a certain price which they have kept as a floor price. And what SEBI regulations mandate is a certain formula related to the floor price that they have given. Now, a large element in terms of how the delisting process is expected to take place and that the approvals have actually come through for Vedanta, it is expected to assume that the book value that is expected to be there for Vedanta for its business activities, right? Indirectly in terms of what they own at this point of time, in terms of the accessibility of the balance sheet of Kensington in terms of cash reserves and what kind of dividend payouts are expected to come out of that, and the core oil and gas business that comes through in terms of the erstwhile Kane India's operations. Now, the expectations of CY18, CY19, and the book value thereof of around 210, 220. The management says that because of deterioration in a lot of aspects, there has been a significant deterioration or impairment in terms of book value. Now, how much of that impairment hit has been very difficult to gauge. But even if you presume a certain percentage and you have the floor price which the management has put forth and you put these perspectives in account, there can be a significant reference in terms of how the entire process will go through. Now, the majority of the minority shareholders have actually given a go through. I think the entire process might go through. So that is how it is being placed at this point of time. So please monitor that, and therefore that needs to get watched out. Neeraj has questioned debt levels. Yeah, debt levels in general still are extremely high, and therefore, as I said, the deleveraging is extremely critical. Now, with a situation like this, specifically in a pandemic that we are talking about, prices have come off. As I said, they're expected to remain stable. But deleveraging will become extremely critical. So, what they are able to do of in terms of either the one listing or the divestment thereof, what happens in terms of other non-core assets on the Indian context that they are able to divest. We are having a target of almost, as I said, 6,100 odd crores in terms of debt deleveraging for this financial year. But deleveraging will become critical because it's a commoditized business, because the end prices will ultimately depend upon demand, because it will ultimately depend in terms of how you are able to arbitrage your input costs, your inventory levels, your production numbers, and take into account your fixed costs absorption as well. Along with the high debt you carry on your balance sheets, ultimately will get reflected on cash flows and the reported EBITDA per ton. So the numbers might go up. They've got the pellet comfort as well. Pellet prices, as I said, are moving higher. And that becomes a softening, cushioning in terms of other businesses not doing well. But clearly the focus has to be on debt and how the debt is reduced. and that will be the focal point. Absolutely right. I'll take the latest question. Shrikant Acharya has asked the question. If I'm not mistaken, this is Shrikant Acharya's question. Oops, scrolling too high. Do you see dumping for China for steel to intervene duties on import? So it really depends, right? So you have to take into account WTA norms. There has been a couple of notifications which came through for certain grades of stainless steel, and the government felt it necessary for certain impacts or grades of stainless steel to have duty impositions. Why? Because domestically, I think it's one of the most consumed sectors from an end user perspective on a mass consumption scale. And there, I think the need was pretty obvious because of the dumping that was happening for stainless steel products. Uh, Also, the scrap that was coming through, right, was pretty large, both steel scrap and aluminum scrap. So I think there have been some notifications on that one. The third element was some notifications on other aspects of certain commodities as well. So yeah, stainless steel, there has been some uh, notifications which have come through. Some companies definitely benefit because of that. A lot of companies, Shrikant has the same question, were bought in NCLT. Will revival of these plants lead to excess capacity? So some of these plants are operative, right? So if you look at, say, Bhushan's acquisition, largely what has happened is Tata Steel with BSL and the high-grade steel that it is producing, the optimum utilization in terms of the plants reaching certain capacity, and they've started doing that at this point of time. Slowly and steadily, I think the numbers should start coming higher. The one-time settlement, the revival of that plant, uh, as I said, in terms of the capacities in the Indian context, right? We produced almost 111 million tons when it comes to steel last year. A lot of companies have gone a little bit on the back foot when it comes to steel production. Uh, JSW Steel, as I said, have maintained around 15 million tons. They're going a little bit easy in terms of capex plans, the fresh capex plans that it had. So the expectations in terms of utilization levels being maintained, right, at around 60, 65, 70 odd percent becomes extremely critical from a fixed cost element perspective for a lot of these players. And therefore, constraining other activities become extremely critical. Demand Indian context, the large element on commentaries is that it is expected to remain quite stable and expected to remain strong in the second half. So there is expectation, as I said, on two counts. One, demand expected to come back, leading to some pricing power. And if input costs start moving higher, for example, as I said, iron ore prices, coking coal, though expected to remain stable, pellet prices expected to remain a little bit on the higher side. Lumps and pine prices expected to remain a little bit on the higher side if price hikes are taken. The obvious need is to increase price hikes to mitigate the input cost increases or input cost inflation at their own end. So Chavan Parag has a question, one stock which will do well. As I said, I discussed this, right, as per the Cansky methodology. It still has some time to go. So there might be some tactical short-term moves here. I already discussed, you need to, the entire process, Mr. P.R. Patil, so you probably need to watch out for that one. How do you see Nalco? So Nalco's performance ultimately, see what has happened in Nalco is that so there are two aspects here. One is the ultimate production numbers that Nalco will come through in terms of steel output. The other element is in terms of the alumina production itself. Now with alumina prices expected to remain very, very stable, and I would request if you have the time today, tomorrow, whenever you have the time, see the Nalco management who had come on TV18 and their statements thereof. They're still expecting prices to remain stable when it comes to alumina. Now, alumina is the input for making aluminum as a whole, and therefore, when you're probably talking about the numbers for Nalco, it holds on two counts: A, the internal consumption that they have, and the excess production that they sell in the open market as well, plus the element of internal power consumption as well. So again, expected to be lumpy because of all the factors for ferrous or non-ferrous as it goes through. But alumina for an alco should actually hold it up rather than aluminium as I see it.